I don't know if he helped with that one or not.
We're live, whatever. It didn't give us a 3, 2, 1. Okay, sorry guys. Technical difficulties. As you well know, that happens a lot. Hi, Dr. Patti Ashley, 10 minutes late for Shameless Facebook Friday Live. And me and my guests are a little like rattled trying to figure out how to get the cameras to work today, but we're here. Deep breath. So I'm so excited. Been doing the Shameless Facebook Live series for a while now, and the special one on grief, grace, and the holidays, particularly, I think, important with what's going on in the world and the time of the year. And I'm very, 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 very excited to introduce my guest today. She's a dear friend of mine and the author of the book Feeling Left Behind, Permission to Grieve. And she's just such a light for people in grief, and I'm excited to talk with her today. And let me introduce Kim Murdock. Hi, Kim.
Hello, Patty. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for
I'm
being.
glad we got the technology figured out.
I know you were black and white, and that happened one other time with Rebecca Folsom, kind of ghostly looking, and so
I mean, it might have been appropriate had we kept me black and white and looked sort of.
We're talking to the other side. I know. I was just sharing with Kim in an email this morning that I had a dream about my partner, Lawrence Freedom, who passed away. He doesn't come in my dreams much anymore, but I said I think he was with us. So I think he may have been playing with the technology too. I think sometimes ghosts will do that. But anyway, tell us a little bit about you, Kim. And I know it's an open-ended question, but you wrote your book. It's been how many years now since the book came out? 2, 3?
No, the book came out last August, so a little over a year.
Okay. So do you want to just share a little bit about you and the book and tell us who you are? Who are you, Kim?
Sure. What's that?
I said, who are you? Tell us who you are.
So I'm just a girl, but I lost my husband to cancer, and at that time I was just devastated and just in tremendous pain, as most people are when they've had a loss, and really searched for meaning and for ways to sort of help with that grief, and decided ultimately to write a book in order to help other people, because what I found was that what helped me the most was not people telling me how to go around the grief, how to quickly get through the grief, how to start thriving in life again. Those things didn't help me. What helped me were the people who would sit with me in the grief, who were experiencing it at the same time, who understood the grief. And I realized that most people, I got really lucky because I had a lot of people whom I met or that I already knew who had the grief experience already, and they were able to help me. But I realized most people don't have that, and they're just out there alone trying to deal with the grief, trying to figure it all out. So I wrote my book, Feeling Left Behind, Permission to Grieve, in order to help people in grief feel like they're not so alone, and to feel like they have permission to grieve, because our society really does such a horrible job at that. We don't make space for people to grieve. So I wanted to make that space for people. So I wrote my book.
Yeah. And I think that's so important because, that's been my work is learning that you have to tell the story at least 100 times, and people get really uncomfortable with it. And so I actually wanted to read, but your book is over there. Go get it. Where is it? Oh, wait a second. I wanted to read something from the book, and now I don't know where it is. Oh, well, that's awkward. Where are you, Kim? You're in here somewhere. I have too many books. Anyway, when I was reading the book and I got to the part about the feelings, that's what I wanted to read, the way you described what you were feeling. And I just could so much relate to that. And it was so important for people to understand, because I think a lot of times what happens is people want to get out of the grief, like you said, and they distract themselves. And I think that's the cause of a lot of addiction, right? It's like people are reaching out, trying to feel better What's going to make me feel better, because we don't have a culture that really says the only way to feel better is to feel bad, right? And so you just beautifully, now I'm embarrassing myself because I can't find the book and I really want to read it. Sorry. Um, just talked about that, just really raw. This is your feelings. This is what is. What was that like for you to write about that?
Well, I had journaled a lot when Reg had died, and so I really just wrote the book from that journaling. And it wasn't so much journaling, like I would write him a daily, like every night I wrote him a letter, just telling him about my day and how I was feeling. And because I had said to my friend, I really miss being able to tell him about my day. And she said, well, why don't you write him a letter every night? So I thought, okay, that's what I'm gonna do. So I did that. So the book was written largely from, I mean, people say to me, how do you remember so many details that you had in the book? Well, because I'd written, pretty much daily, so it was easy to go back through. So what was it like writing the book? I mean, I had already done the writing, so it was more organizing it into ways that would be comprehensible to other people. So it is vulnerable. I intentionally did that because when you're in grief, you are so vulnerable, and I wanted to even show the bad sides of grief, because there's some parts of grief that they're not pretty, and maybe embarrassing, and I wanted people to be able to feel whatever they need to feel. And so I shared all of that, even though some of it's pretty raw and pretty vulnerable, and can certainly leave me open to a lot of judgment and criticism, but I wanted to do that to give people permission to grieve. So that's a little hard, but
Right. And I'm so glad you did, because like I said, when I read it, I was like, oh yeah, she's like speaking to my heart. She's like saying it, this is what it is. And how many people have the courage to do that? Because again, we want to try and this is too much. I have to get out of it. And to know that we do get through it, right? I mean, it doesn't last forever. And the thing is, it will, I think, creep up on us. That's what I learned when I was in graduate school when I was 30, was one of my instructors for one of my classes said, all depression is unresolved grief, which is one of the chapters in my book. And that's when I started thinking, oh, I probably have some grief that is unresolved. Not that we resolve it. I don't like that word. I don't think it ever gets resolved. Didn't you and I talk about that? Is there a better word for
probably
for
that and heal? I hate heal. I have a chapter in my book called "Heal is a Stupid Word," because I don't think you ever heal. I think you just learn to live with the grief. You learn to go on with life. You learn to still be happy in life. But I hate the word heal. Like, that sounds like it's all wrapped up nicely, and
yeah,
and it's not.
I know. And that's what I've been thinking about too. What is it when we get to this side? I mean, it's not as intense. It doesn't take you down the way it does, the first few years. You know, but is it resolved? I don't know what the word is for that, but
Well, I think it can still creep back up. I mean, I think even 20 years later, you can all of a sudden see something that reminds you of your partner or your child, or whatever, and bam, you're just blindsided with the grief. So I think for me, what I feel like once that grief lives in you, then it's always available. Like, I always sort of say, like, it's lurking. Like, even though you're going about your life and you're doing your thing and you might be happy, but it's always lurking, ready to pounce at some level. So I'll give you an example. I went to this summer, I went to the drive-in with my nephew, and we saw Grease and Dirty Dancing, which are two movies I loved. And we're watching Dirty Dancing, and there's a scene in there where the younger sister is named Baby. I'm sure everybody knows this movie, right? And then her sister, Baby's upset at one point, and her sister says, "I'll do your hair and you'll look pretty." And then she comforts Baby. And all of a sudden I could just feel the tears come up. And my sister died, she died 18 years ago, I think. And all of a sudden, but my sister loved to do my hair. And, on my first dates with my husband, my sister did my hair. So I knew I looked pretty. And all of a sudden, when she said, I'll do your hair so you look pretty, I mean, I'm just sitting there, I'm watching the movie, I'm at the drive-in, like, we're enjoying ourselves. And then there comes the tears. Like, oh, my sister will never be here to make me look pretty again and comfort me. And so that's why I feel like even though you get to the other side and you're going about life, I think it's still there. Once it resides in you, it's still available to come back out at any given time, but it doesn't last as long. So I had that moment, had little tears, went about my business, watching the movie and enjoying the movie again. So it doesn't linger, but it's still there.
Yeah, it's very different. I know Hope Edelman, I'm going to interview in a couple of weeks. Her new book is called The After Grief. And that's what she talks about. And, she lost her mom when she was a teen, and how it shows up in these different times of our life, like when we get married or when we, have children. The grief resurfaces in a different way. And like you said, I don't think it's as intense, but it's still there. What you're talking about reminds me of when I started doing my unresolved grief work with my therapist around my dad. My dad died when I was 11. And now I'm 30 years old. And this professor says, depression is unresolved grief. I took my kids who were then early teens to see The Lion King. And, the father dies in The Lion King. And I'm crying. And my kids are like, the cartoon version. They were like, Mom, why? Well, Mom cried at The Lion King.
Yep, exactly. I mean, who would think I'm taking my kids to see The Lion King? You are not thinking this is going to lead you to tears.
They're still saying, Mom, do you remember when you did that? Yeah.
I get it. Totally get it.
It's the thing is though that the chronic pain. I mean, it's hard. Grief like takes you down, right? I mean, yeah, and so permission to grieve is so important, because when we try and get out of that pain, we actually, stuff it down, and then it is going to come out even more later, as opposed to the experiences that you and I are talking about, where we just go, oh, there it is again. And then it's like making the unconscious conscious, basically. And I think a lot of that is, what I do in my work is, what's going on in the shadow that we don't want to feel because it hurts, and how do we make it conscious? And usually that's a relief in itself. And that's why, I think your book is so important. I meant to say earlier, let us know if you're here, say hi. If you have any questions for Kim, I'm interviewing Kim Murdock, my friend and the author of the book, Feeling Left Behind, Permission to Grieve. So say hello, ask questions.
Hello. I'm just checking my phone because somebody texted me and said that she was trying to listen and it took her to November 13th. So I don't know if we actually have anybody listening or not, because I don't know if we're having technical issues again.
November 13th. Okay. Well, I don't know. It looks like there's a few people watching up here in the little I section.
Oh, okay. So maybe we are live.
And we have one like or something. Anyway, we'll just keep going and people can watch. Oh, we have Rebecca Zuckerman. Hi, Kim. Okay, so she's here.
Hello, Rebecca.
Okay. And then they'll be recorded so people can watch it live. But anyway, technology. Anyway, we won't get lost in that quagmire of technology. We'll just keep talking. Okay, so no, your book is so important. And when you were saying about writing the letters, it's interesting because I did something similar, but I wrote stories because I wanted to, two things. One, I wanted to try and think if there was anything that happened that could have given me a clue, because Lawrence died suddenly, and I was like, so I wanted to remember the things that had happened, the things we had done together, and to see if maybe there were some clues. So it's a similar idea. There's you wrote letters to him and I wrote stories about him. And that was the basis of my book as well. So I'm planning a workshop this weekend, if anyone's interested, to go along with my course, Transforming Grief and Fear into Love and Grace. And it's a webinar to give people journal prompts and, some structure around doing just that. So I'm
Nice.
planning to do that tomorrow morning for that reason. So I think that's, people don't have to write a book like you and I did. And I think, sometimes people think that, I didn't, and it doesn't sound like you did either, do the writing because we were going to publish it. Um, we did the writing for ourselves, right? You were saying I wanted to write him letters and I wanted to connect with him. And that's such a great thing to do in grief. It's just such a great way to connect.
That being said, people often say to me, well, I'm sure your book was very therapeutic. And for me, it wasn't. Like, really, the reason why I wrote the book was specifically to help other people. It was never about helping me through my grief. I think the letter writing that I did to Reg, that was enough for that. For me, the book was 100% about helping other people and also trying to give some sort of meaning to his death. So
Yeah.
So I do think the writing is important, but that's not why I wrote the book.
Right, but it's like the writing itself was a therapeutic part, and that's what I was saying. People don't have to write thinking they're going to write a book.
Right.
Write to write, because writing is so helpful to move the grief and to express ourselves. And so, like I said, you wrote the letters, I wrote the stories. That sounds like a song. You wrote the letters, I wrote the stories. We ended up with books. And I don't think, I know there's a lot of people out there who say they want to write books and how do you write books, and and you and I, we've been through the process of how you write books and how you market books, and it's not an easy process. And the intention of, like, your intention was, I want to help people, I want to give. Literally, that's why I love your subtitle so much, which was going to be the original title, and then I think you changed it, right? Giving people permission to grieve. And that's why you wrote the book. And I wrote the book for a similar reason too, to give people an awareness of how important it is to acknowledge and move through and be able to manage grief. But the stories I wrote and the letters you wrote are therapeutic pieces. And that's, I think, most important for people out there who may want to write and don't, like, if I sat down and I'm like, I'm going to write a letter about I'm going to write a story, I'm going to publish a book about my grief, the writing would be very different from sitting down and emoting the stories, and in your case, the letters, right?
Yeah. Yeah, because I think, one of the things I was really intentional about too is, I think if you're thinking I want to write a story or a book about grief, I think a lot of times if you write it, like, that thought comes later once you've gotten through the grief. And then I feel like I was very intentional to make sure that my book was about the rawness of the grief. And if I were to write a book now, it would be a little bit different, because now I'm not as vulnerable and raw. And so I think, having the thought that you're going to write about grief, sometimes that comes later when the grief has morphed a little bit. So.
Right. So if you were to write a book about grief now, what would be different?
Well, again, I was very intentional to make sure that I used the feelings that I felt initially, because even when I wrote the book, I was still not as raw and vulnerable, but I made sure to have the vulnerability in there that I felt at the start for the first couple of years. Mm-hmm. So, if I wrote a book now, part of it would be, well, you do eventually get through it. Well, again, I don't like through it, because then that implies that it's completely done, but you do, like the holidays. I like Christmas now, but boy, did I hate it at the start. I mean, I wanted no part of it. I wanted, please just let this go away. Like, do not make me listen to Christmas songs, especially I'll Be Home for Christmas. God, that was painful, because he's never coming home for Christmas again. And so it's the most wonderful time of the year. No, I'm sorry. It's not. And so, like, at the start, Christmas was brutal, absolutely brutal. But now I like it. Like, I like getting presents for people. I decorate my house, and that's partially because I hate winter. Like, I really hate winter, and Christmas provides a way to change up the decorations in my house. If I drive down the street, I see people's cute little decorations on their lawn. So it gives me a break from just the dark, cold winter. So I think I like I have Christmas dishes that I use. And so I'm not somebody who changes things up on a normal basis. Like, I have my dishes that we've had for 20 years, and I'm never going to buy new dishes because why would I waste my money on that? But at Christmas time, I have Christmas dishes, so I get a little variety. And so I like Christmas now.
Yeah.
So, if I were to write a book now, I might say, like, hey, yeah, you can enjoy Christmas again. But I think when you're brand new in that grief, you just don't want to be told that, because you just want people to understand this is really painful. And why doesn't everybody understand that I just want Christmas to go away?
Yeah.
And I think that's a pretty common. I know one of my friends, like, she took her family to Hawaii for their first Christmas. And I think for many years after that, they traveled because it was just so painful after her husband died. She wanted nothing to do with Christmas. So they went to Hawaii, which is about the opposite of Christmas as you can get. Though I know, resorts put up Christmas trees and things like that. But so in my book, I wanted to be really intentional about showing how difficult those first Christmases are. But now I like it. So it would be different. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I remember when I was at your house a few years ago, and you said that, and I think I was still new in my grief, and I've never, ever since I got divorced, I haven't really liked Christmas because it just feels like the whole magic of it just is hard to get family together and to really have what we had when the kids were little, and so it's always been a lingering grief for me, Christmas. But I do sometimes find what you're talking about, the joy and the lights and everything. But I remember being at your house and you were like, I love Christmas. And it reminds me of Reg, and I feel like he's here. And I was like, that's so amazing. That's so beautiful that you can do that. And I think it's a real good testimony to how, like you said, we don't necessarily get through grief, but that, to me, that's the grace of now, I'm not in the gut-wrenching grief phase. And now I can find the grace in feeling the memories and finding the light in the holiday. And when you were talking, I was like, what did I do on the first Christmas after Lawrence died? And I remember some of my kids came to Colorado to be with me, which is just a great treat because we all live far apart, and trying to get my kids together is hard. So two of my kids and one of their partners, and I said, let's play what's the game with the train? Mexican Train. Lawrence loved that game. It's like dominoes where you lay out the dominoes anyway, he loved that game. And he had said to me, I can't wait to meet your kids and play Mexican Train. I think that's what it's called. Anyway, so I was like, let's play Mexican Train. And we were setting up the pieces and I was like, I can't remember how to play. How do we play? What are the directions? And then I just started bawling, and then my now daughter-in-law who was there, she was like, okay. And she starts cleaning up the table and putting it all away, right? It's like, it's not the same thing because, I don't want to make her uncomfortable. I just kind of cleaned up my expression of grief. But I mean, that's a perfect example of, I just remember, I was like, what?
Yeah. Oh yeah. I can tell that. Yeah. For me, the first Christmas, I actually did end up decorating. At first, I didn't plan to. And then I thought, Christmas isn't going to go away. And so I have to figure out how to get through this Christmas. And so I ended up getting a tree, like a small tree, and decorating it with Reg's favorite ornaments, which in the past, I put all my favorite ornaments on the front of the tree. We always decorated the tree together, but somehow I hogged up the best space for the stuff that I like the most. So his ornaments that I really didn't like all that much, they kind of went towards the back. And so I got a tree and I just decorated it with ones that we had gotten together or that he really liked that had sort of been relegated to the back of the tree before. And I ended up loving that little tree because it felt like a memorial to him, and it felt like a way to honor him, and like he would love this tree. And so that helped me get through my first Christmas, even though I was in tremendous pain. It's like I had to figure out how do I can't, it's not like one day, like their birthday is one day and you have to get through that. And there's anxiety before it for sure. But Christmas is a whole long season. And so it's like, you can't just check out and not get through it. So I had to find a way to how do I get through this? And so for me, that was just incorporating him into the celebration. So,
which is such a great idea, and it's so important. And again, that's what I'm calling grace, because that's the word Lawrence used. When he lost his wife, and he said there's this deeper love that's grace. That's the only word I can use. So I think that's what grace is to me. And this whole series is called Grief and Grace in the holidays. I think my course that I did is on grace, and that to me is grace right there. That there he is in the ornaments, and how is he still with me, even after his body's no longer around. There's a funny thing I record. Oh, where'd you go? Oh no, she's gone. She'll be back. Technical difficulties. Yeah, let us know if you're here. I am technology. See if she's black and white. She's gonna be black and white. Okay, Lawrence, he's messing with us now. Everyone gets to see you in black and white, Kim. Okay. I can hide that, so people, if you're too embarrassed to look like a ghost. I was just gonna say, I'll say it. Well, oh, there you go. Oh my gosh, totally Lawrence. Totally Lawrence.
Yeah, I did not. I mean, my hands were back here. I did not touch that computer.
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
Lawrence,
that's what I've heard people say, that people who pass on mess with technology, and Lawrence had a really, really wicked sense of humor. So I wouldn't be surprised, because what I was going to say was, I was going to tell a story about, I record Colbert and Jimmy Fallon, and I watch the recordings because I'm not up that late. And who was it? I can't remember which one was interviewing some, I don't know the guy's name either, but he's a really well-known dude. He has his glasses on, and he was talking about, how people don't believe in ghosts, right? Because, but why is it that he was talking about Ginsburg and, the other people that have died, and that recently before the election, and how they influenced the election from wherever they were. Right. And he's like, people gotta understand, they say that ghosts aren't real, but then they can say that they talk to these people who passed on, or these people are influencing things, but they better than just get used to the idea that there is such a thing as a ghost. So anyway, it was so funny, and I'm not good at telling the story because I'm terrible at names and my memory of details is bad, but hopefully you got the idea from the story. Yeah. But it was so funny, as I'm getting ready to say that, you turn into this ghost by the black and white screen.
Oh, that's so weird.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's no reason for that, because I did not touch the computer. I can see you. You're not moving around touching the computer, so I don't know. I don't know what to say.
Grace, right? And you showed back up. So, and thank goodness it's in color, because it's such a beautiful painting behind you.
Thank you. My grandmother did that.
It's beautiful. Oh my gosh, I love it. So, what else? Anybody else want to say hello and ask a question for Kim, and getting through grief and grieving?
One thing I've thought a lot about is how COVID affects people who are experiencing grief, new grief, because sometimes I think, would it be easier now? Because when you and I were going through Christmas during the and Thanksgiving, any of the holidays, people were really happy and they were celebrating and all the traditional things were going on, and that was so painful that we didn't have those experiences anymore. And now I think would it be a little easier now, excuse me, because everything's already messed up and you're not able to go to the traditional things. Like people aren't gathering, there's not parties. I mean, I went to my first Christmas without Reg. There's a group of women who have a party every year, and I walked into that room at that Christmas party and I went, oh no, and I walked right back out the door. And so, you don't have that this year. There's not parties this year. And so is that easier or is that harder because you don't have a distraction either? So I've thought a lot about that. So if anybody's out there grieving and I mean, I'd be curious to know like how and if it's different this year.
Yeah. I think it's hard regardless. I think it's so brutal watching the stories of people who are, dying and alone because they can't be with people, and the people who have to watch their family members die through on a FaceTime or something. It's like, there's so many good news, bad news. Well, I don't know about good news, bad news. That's a bad way to put it. But I know for me, I'm actually kind of relieved because trying to orchestrate Christmas with 4 kids in 4 different parts of the country and grandkids and not knowing how to go and who to go and how anybody's going to afford to see each other, that this year it's like, well, we're not doing anything because of COVID. So it's kind of like that's what I'm experiencing for myself, and as much as I don't like Christmas. I even went out and bought a little tabletop tree a few weeks ago, which is already like dried out and ready. I'm like, how many more days till Christmas? Because this tree's not going to make it.
Oh no!
I was getting a little excited because I didn't have to, like in line with what you said, I didn't have to figure out how I was going to get all the kids together. Not that we ever do, but at least one or more, and which part of the country I'm going to go to, or are they going to come to, and how are we going to afford all this? And it's just way too much for me to do Christmas with 4 kids and grandkids and do it in a way that looks like, the way Christmas is supposed to look. So I'm kind of off the hook this year for that one.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. But I think it's hard. I think COVID is, just adds, it's collective grief. We're grieving what we're familiar with. We're grieving, so many things. And
well, I think as a society, but I think again, one of the things that was hard for me was watching all the joy around me when I was so miserable. And right now, everybody's kind of miserable and everybody's kind of not being able to do what they want to do. And so that's what I'm saying. I agree. I think there's collective grief in the whole country or the whole world. So but as an aside, does it affect people who are specifically grieving the loss of a loved one? And I don't know, because obviously you're going to grieve that whether we're in COVID or not.
Right.
Yeah. So.
It's a layer. What I'm hearing you say is a layer of, I don't have to experience that. I'm not having this experience that other people get to have right now because nobody's having it.
Right. And but at the same time, you're so isolated. At least that's been my experience, is that when you go into grief, you just want to isolate. And so is COVID making that worse? Because now you have an excuse to be isolated, and that's not necessarily always good either. So I'm curious how COVID is affecting the grieving process right now.
Yeah. I'm sure it's all over across the board. I mean, and even all the people, that are traveling, my family, we've all decided not to travel. But there are people who still are. And we're talking about, how many more cases we're going to have after Thanksgiving. And then we're coming into Christmas. And, how much of that is reaching out and trying to have that, connection with people and what's familiar. Because there's a grief in not going. There's a grief in choosing to not have what is familiar, but yet then you're also risk, getting infected and infecting. It's like COVID is so hard in so many ways because it's so multi-layered and dimensional in terms of, well, this decision affects this decision, and then but what about that? What about that? So And that's like exhausting. Like grief is exhausting. It's like, whew, there's no solution here. It just is.
Yeah.
That's what it
Yeah.
is.
Exactly.
Well, I love what you're doing, Kim, and I think it's so important. And I don't know if there's anything else that you want to share with us before we wrap up.
I'm sure I'll think of something after we get off.
Yeah, I know. I wish I could have found your book, but it wasn't meant to be. What else?
I have the book, but I don't know what you wanted. I don't know what you wanted to read. So,
Well, is there something you want to read? A little piece?
oh, no.
Okay. I was going to read, you probably don't want to read, and maybe it's good. It's the part that you were saying that was so vulnerable, just that raw, this is what I'm feeling part. You
Well,
just,
the whole thing is vulnerable.
what? The whole
The
book.
whole thing is vulnerable.
That was, just because our emotional self is nonverbal, really, if you think about it. When we feel something, there's no language. We create language. And so that's why I love Brene Brown, because she gives language to shame and vulnerability and courage in a way that I think hadn't been done that way before. And that's what I saw in your book is the language to the experience that just kind of laid it out there for people. And then it's like, for me, it was comforting, not because it was emotions that feel bad, but comforting that I'm not alone, that
Right.
that is exactly what it feels like. And
Right.
thank you for giving me permission and telling me that it's just not me. I mean,
Yeah.
it's just not.
There's a chapter in there talking about my anger and how angry I was at him for dying. Um, and there's a woman that I've become friends with that we met in choir practice, and she had lost her husband. I think it was like 20 or 30 years ago. I mean, it was a long time ago. And she got my book and she called me and she said, thanks for putting that in your book, because at the time my husband died, and her husband had been shot. And I said, she said, at the time my husband died, I told my mom I was really angry and I was like mad at him that he died. And my mom told me, oh, you shouldn't feel that way. And so she sort of shamed how her feelings were. And so all these years, like, that's what she remembered. And then she read in my book how mad I was at Reg for dying. And it was like, oh, okay, that's normal. Because it's normal. Of course it's normal to be angry. You were really angry with Lawrence for dying. And, I mean, as we're fumbling around with the technology, Reg was amazing at technology. And you and I can't get this thing to work. And it's like, oh, why aren't you here to fix this? So even now, sometimes I get really mad at him for dying. And so, so that's what I tried to do, is just like these poor people who are being told, no, your feelings are wrong. Mm-hmm. You say, well, I don't know, maybe, but they're normal.
Mm-hmm. And that's such an important part. I'm glad you brought that up, because anger is an emotion that, historically we've been talked out of. Don't be angry, but really anger is an important emotion because it helps us move forward. It makes us realize, it energizes us. Anger gives us a lot of information. It's just what we do with the anger. We don't want to hurt ourselves or somebody else with the anger. And that's, what we finally learned, how to separate the two. But when you take it into the grief experience, it's like, whoa. I mean, I remember when I learned the stages of grief, Kubler-Ross's stages of grief, and realized that anger was a part of grief. It's like, oh, I can be angry at my father for dying. Am I angry at God? What am I? I can be angry, and I got angry. I yelled and screamed and pounded pillows and wrote him letters, and and I moved that energy, and it was just such a relief to realize that it's okay. Because anger itself is hard for a lot of people to do because we don't know how to do it well. And then when somebody who's died, we can't be angry with that person for dying, but we can.
Oh, I know. I got that all the time. He tried really hard to stay alive. You can't be mad at him. He tried really hard. He didn't want to die.
Yeah.
Well, he did, and I'm mad.
Exactly. Yeah, and I like that you were able to say that and articulate that for people. I think it's so important. And again, people are so afraid to feel their feelings because they're so afraid they're going to go down a dark hole and never get out. And I think
Yeah.
you and I are a testimony that we get out,
Yeah.
and we hold them in our hearts. And you and I love you so much because you're the one person in my life that I understand, that I feel like gets this. And we can be playful, like, oh, we had a dream about him last night, or, we're mad at him today, or, here's this little ladybug that showed, and to just understand and be with you in that grace too, grief and grace. That's what I say. The most important thing is a enlightened witness, someone who can really be with us in our grief. And I so appreciate you, Kim, because you definitely are probably, I hate to say that for any of my other friends out there, but you're probably number one in terms of being with the enlightened witness role. You got that down. And that's what we all need, is an enlightened witness. It's such a gift. And we may just have one. And that's enough. And I would ask, pass this on to you, is that don't be afraid to reach out to your enlightened witness. I think, would you say that's true? Is, we have to connect. Yeah.
Yeah, I think so, because I just actually had this experience with a friend 2 nights ago. She was having grief come up, and it had been 5 years, and she was crying, and we were out for a walk, and she's crying and she's crying, and then we proceeded to walk, and we had all sorts of conversations, and when she went to get in her car, and she said, "Thank you, I feel much better now," because sometimes just getting it out is what needs to happen. And so having somebody who is willing to listen, and not everybody is, because grief is uncomfortable for people. And if you haven't been through grief, I don't think you can understand why it's not gone a month later or a year later. And so I think, if you have somebody, then that's beneficial. And not everybody does. But yeah, I agree. Reaching out to people.
And if you don't, support groups and therapists and spiritual companions are important to have. And I know when you were talking, that reminds me of on my birthday this year in July, when we were going for a hike. And I sat down at the trailhead and just said, all this grief came up, and I just talked, and you listened, and then I was better. And it's kind of like what you said with your friend, then I was better. But what if, like, say if I was with my sister and she'd say, oh, come on, it's been 4 years now. What, come on, you got to get on with your life. That's what I grew up with, was the shame around, it's over now. It's been 4 years, come on. But you listened and you validated, and then I was better. It's like the story I always tell about my daughter when she was like 3 or 4 years old, and she was crying, and my mom said, Laura, stop crying. You're so much prettier when you're not crying. And she just cried and wailed even louder. And I said, Mom, she'll stop when she's ready. And she heard me say that, and she stopped immediately when I said she'll stop when she's ready, because I gave her permission. Back to your book, which is so awesome. I gave her permission to cry, and that's what stopped the tears. So we realize that the more we try and talk people out of their feelings with good intentions, right?
Of course.
Aren't trying to make things worse. They're trying to make it better.
Yeah.
Inadvertently, it makes it worse, because we have to, have a safe place to share our feelings so we can move through them. So.
Yeah, agreed.
You're such a gift. Well, I want to ask you, when we get off, to put a link to your book in the comment section so people can get it. I know I've put it out a couple different places, but I just want to be sure it ends up in our recording, because people will watch this later. So all you have to do,
you said in the comment section?
Yeah, in the comment section on Facebook, if you can just put the link to your book, that would be great. And I also want to remind people that I have a course online now called Transforming Grief and Fear into Love and Grace. That's a do-at-your-own pace course. You can sign up for, and the link, I'll put that link, it's on my website, the link to that course. And tomorrow at 10 o'clock, Writing Stories of Grief is a live webinar. If you want to join me, just be in touch. And then Kim's book, Feeling Left Behind, Permission to Grieve, and my book, Letters to Freedom. Pick them up on Amazon if you know anybody who's grieving, and hopefully it will help. So thank you, Kim. It's always
Thanks, Patty. Great chatting with you. Always a pleasure.
Yes, yes, yes. Love you so much. All right. Well,
Love you too.
all right. Bye-bye.
Goodbye.